Since I was a kid, my life was never really my own. My parents, Debbie and Rick, decided everything for me. I'm not exaggerating, I mean everything. What I wore, who I talked to, what classes I took, what books I read, what hobbies I was allowed to have. Even the type of shampoo I used had to be approved by my mother. Meanwhile, my younger brother Travis, the golden boy, lived a completely different life. Somehow, he figured out early on that if he just said no and refused to cooperate, my parents would let him do whatever he wanted without much more than a sigh or an eye roll. I, on the other hand, was too afraid. The few times I tried to push back, the punishments were swift and brutal. Grounding for weeks. No phone. No internet. Silent treatment from both parents like I was some kind of criminal. It didn't take long for me to realize it was easier to just obey. When I was around 7, things started getting more intense. I remember once I picked out a blue dress for my school photo day. I thought it looked pretty. My mom yanked it out of my hands at the last second and shoved a stiff, itchy pink one into my arms. "You'll wear this. You need to look presentable," she snapped. I cried that morning while getting dressed, but no one cared. At school, kids noticed. They would whisper about how I always looked like a little porcelain doll, stiff and perfect. I hated it. I hated the way the lace on my sleeves scratched my arms, and the way the bows made me feel like I was someone else entirely. As I got older, it only got worse. Debbie monitored every friend I made. If she didn't approve of a girl's parents, clothes, or manners, I wasn't allowed to see her anymore. Most of my friendships died quietly that way. When I was about 10, a new girl moved into our neighborhood. Her name was Mia. She had a huge wild mane of curly red hair and wore ripped jeans with doodles on them. She didn't care about rules. She climbed trees, swore under her breath, and had pierced ears she did herself with a needle and an ice cube. Of course, I loved her immediately. Mia introduced me to a world I had never seen before. She showed me how to sneak into the abandoned factory at the edge of town, how to make a slingshot out of a branch and a rubber band, and how to draw graffiti with chalk on the sidewalks where it would wash away with the rain. When Debbie found out, and she always found out, she lost her mind. She grounded me for a month, took away every toy I liked, and even made me scrub the house floors with a toothbrush for lying about where I was. Travis, meanwhile, was getting into real trouble. At 12, he got caught stealing cigarettes from a gas station. My parents barely said anything to him. Rick gave him some half-hearted boys will be boys speech, and Debbie ruffled his hair and said, "Just don't do it again, sweetheart." I was furious. But fury didn't help me. It only made things worse. By the time I hit 13, I wasn't even allowed to pick my own classes. I wanted to take art badly. Drawing was the only thing that made me feel like myself. But no, Debbie decided I would take Introduction to Business because, and I quote, "art won't put food on your table." Around this time, my parents started introducing more mentors into my life. People I didn't choose, family friends and weird acquaintances they trusted to guide me. There was Mrs. Carmichael, a retired teacher who smelled like boiled cabbage and liked to lecture me for hours about how girls shouldn't dream too big. There was Mr. Levine, a creepy insurance guy who kept touching my shoulders way too much whenever he visited and called me princess in a voice that made my skin crawl. I complained to my mother once about Mr. Levine. She waved me off. "He's an old friend," she said. "He's harmless." I didn't believe her. I started locking my bedroom door at night after that. When I entered high school, things became unbearable. While other kids got to go to football games, dances, or just hang out at the mall, I was stuck at home studying for tests I wasn't even taking yet. Debbie would stand over my shoulder, peering at my notebooks, criticizing my handwriting. Rick barely spoke to me at all unless it was to bark orders or lecture me about not wasting their investment. Meanwhile, Travis was out until 2 a.m., getting drunk with his friends, crashing cars, even getting suspended once for fighting. Nothing happened to him. If anything, they spoiled him even more. He got a brand new Mustang for his 16th birthday, a bright red one, customized with leather seats and a stereo system that probably cost more than all my possessions combined. I got a refurbished laptop for mine, with parental control software already installed. At school, I was a ghost. Not quite a nerd, not quite a loner, just a girl people didn't know much about. Mia tried to keep me in her orbit, but we drifted apart after too many canceled plans and too many awkward explanations about why I couldn't hang out. There were other friends too, but none of them lasted. It's hard to keep friendships when your life is scheduled down to the minute and you have to lie about everything to protect yourself. One time I thought I had found a safe place. It was with my history teacher, Mr. Walters. He was one of the few adults who seemed to genuinely listen to me. I stayed after class a few times, just talking about books, about life, about how trapped I felt. He encouraged me to apply to a summer program out of state, something that could help me see a bigger world. When I brought the idea home, Debbie shut it down immediately. "Out of the question," she said, as if I had asked to join a biker gang. "We need you here. You're too young. It's not safe." Rick didn't even look up from his newspaper. I cried in my room for 3 days after that. Not loudly, of course. Loud crying would get me a lecture about emotional manipulation. Instead, I just laid there, staring at the ceiling, feeling like my life was happening somewhere else to someone else. At 17, things reached a boiling point. It started with a boy. Of course it did. I always knew my parents were controlling, but I never understood how deep the roots went until I got engaged to Alex. Alex wasn't like anyone my parents had ever picked for me. In fact, he wasn't picked at all. I met him through a random stroke of luck, a community college writing workshop I had snuck into against my mother's wishes. He was smart, funny, a little rough around the edges. He worked construction during the day and took night classes trying to build a better life. He wasn't polished or rich. He wasn't pre-approved. But he was kind. He made me feel seen in a way nobody else had. When he proposed, it wasn't elaborate. No fireworks, no viral videos. Just the two of us sitting on the back of his beat-up Chevy Silverado, passing a bottle of warm soda between us under a bruised evening sky. He didn't even have a ring yet. He asked me if I was sure about him, about us, about building something without safety nets. I said yes without thinking. For the first time in my life, I chose something just for myself. Telling my parents was the real mistake. I still remember sitting across the heavy oak dining table, Alex's calloused hands sweaty and mine, Debbie's face hardening second by second as we told them the news. There was a moment of silence so thick you could feel the air vibrating. Then, without even pretending to be happy, Debbie leaned forward and said, "Well, naturally we'll handle the wedding arrangements. You're much too inexperienced to plan something of this magnitude." I opened my mouth to protest, but she kept going, already flipping open a leather-bound planner she pulled from God knows where. "We'll reserve the ballroom at the Fairmont Grand. It's about $20,000 just for the venue, but it's worth every penny. You'll wear a custom gown. I'll have my friend Tasha design it. And, of course, we'll need professional photographers, caterers, florists." Rick interrupted only to ask if Alex's parents were prepared to contribute at least $50,000 to match their investment. Alex sputtered, caught off guard. His parents barely had 2 dimes to rub together. They lived in a cramped apartment on the edge of town, still working minimum-wage jobs to stay afloat. Debbie waved it off with a tight smile. "Well, then, it's only fair that Alex agrees to a few conditions." Her eyes glittered as she laid them out. "First, he would legally change his last name to ours. We have a legacy to protect," she said, as if the family name was some sacred artifact. "Second, he would sign a prenuptial agreement, ensuring that in case of divorce, any assets they deemed family property remained untouched. And third, the worst, he would agree to have our first child baptized at their church, despite neither of us being particularly religious." I thought Alex would laugh in their faces. Instead, he sat there stunned, too polite to explode. I squeezed his hand harder, trying to telegraph that he didn't have to say yes. But before either of us could say a word, Debbie pulled out a folder thick with printed plans, flower arrangements, menu options, seating charts, a goddamn DJ list. She had been planning this moment for months, maybe years, waiting for me to fall into line. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Every day was a new demand. Debbie announced the engagement on her Facebook before I even had a chance to tell my friends. She scheduled dress consultations without asking if I had a dress in mind. She hired a life coach named Camille, a sharp-faced woman with a clipboard, to prepare me for being a proper wife. Camille's idea of preparation included etiquette lessons, forced dieting, and posture correction sessions that left my back screaming. Meanwhile, Alex's patience wore thinner by the day. His friend Marcus, a bartender with more tattoos than common sense, started calling me princess whenever I came by, half mocking, half sympathetic. I didn't blame him. I hardly recognized myself anymore. I was drowning in tool and passive aggression. One evening, after yet another 3-hour wedding planning dinner where Debbie meticulously critiqued everything from Alex's handshake to my laugh, we sat in his truck staring out at the dark. "I don't think I can do this," he finally said, voice raw. I thought my heart would split in two. "I don't want to lose you," I whispered. He looked at me, his eyes tired but still so full of that stubborn love I had fallen for. "Then we need to do this on our terms. Not theirs." It sounded so simple. It wasn't. The first real explosion happened when Debbie found out we had toured a tiny rustic barn venue without her permission. She showed up at my apartment, Rick trailing behind like a silent storm cloud, and tore through the place like a hurricane, screaming about betrayal, about shame, about how I was throwing away everything they had given me. At one point, she held up a framed photo of me as a little girl and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, glass flying. "This is what you're destroying," she shrieked. Rick said nothing, just stood there breathing heavily, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. I realized then, this wasn't about love. It was about ownership. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was property. That night, I packed a single bag. Alex picked me up around midnight. We drove out to Marcus's place, a crummy duplex with peeling paint, and he let us crash on his ratty couch without asking questions. For the first time, I woke up without someone telling me what to do. But freedom didn't come cheap. It didn't happen in a grand cinematic way. There was no screaming match, no slamming of doors. It started quietly, almost invisibly, a quiet rebellion that even I barely recognized as my own at first. The night after I moved into Marcus's duplex with Alex, I sat on the floor with my back against the peeling wall, staring at my phone. My savings app was open. Years of babysitting, tutoring, birthday checks hoarded away, summer jobs scrimped and saved, all sitting there under a single account at First Federal Bank. My mother's name was still listed on the account as a co-signer for safety. Safety. Right. The balance stared back at me, $153,284.76. I thought about the hundreds of times Debbie had told me it was our money, not mine. "You wouldn't have it without us," she loved to remind me, as if every dollar I had earned were on loan from them. Not anymore. The next morning, before Debbie even knew where I was, I found a tiny branch of a credit union in the next town over, Hawthorne Community Bank, population, about 5 staffers and a sleepy security guard who looked like he hadn't moved since the Nixon administration. The woman who helped me open the account was named Janie. She had bright purple glasses and a silver bob haircut, and when I told her I needed everything to be absolutely confidential, she gave me a long, considering look and then nodded. I transferred the entire $153,284.76 into a new account under my name alone. It felt like cutting an invisible cord tied around my throat. I didn't stop there. I got a new debit card, changed the security questions to answers nobody could guess, and installed a secure banking app Alex's friend Darren, a paranoid software engineer, recommended. Darren even helped me set up an emergency alert system. If anyone tried to hack or reset my information, my phone would buzz immediately. He didn't ask why. He just muttered something about psycho parents and tightened the settings even further. I didn't tell Alex at first. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I needed this to be mine. My first true act of independence. When Debbie found out a few days later that she no longer had access to the old account, she didn't call or text. She showed up at Marcus's doorstep like a storm cloud in a Prada coat. Marcus opened the door with a beer in one hand and a raised eyebrow. "You lost." She brushed past him without permission and found me sitting on the sagging couch, helping Alex fill out job applications for a construction company in the city. "You moved your money," she said. Her voice was deceptively calm, but I could see the rage vibrating beneath her skin. "Yes," I said simply. "You stole it." "No, I protected it." For a moment, I thought she might hit me. Instead, she pulled out her phone and started rapid-firing calls to Rick, to their family lawyer, even to a cop friend named Officer Darrow, who had always turned a blind eye to their antics. I sat there watching her, strangely detached, like I was floating above the scene. When Officer Darrow arrived 20 minutes later, Marcus just laughed and handed him a beer too. "Civil matter," Darrow muttered, uncomfortable. "Nothing criminal here. She's an adult." Debbie's face crumpled. Not in sadness, in defeat. That's when I knew she had lost her grip. The next battle was the wedding. Debbie sent me a 60-page binder titled Our Wedding Vision. Printed, bound, color-coded tabs, inspirational quotes at the top of every section. I didn't open it. I tossed it straight into Marcus's dumpster behind the duplex, where it landed with a satisfying thunk among broken beer bottles and greasy pizza boxes. The next morning, I sent her a single, official email. Subject: Wedding planning. Body: I appreciate your concern, but Alex and I will be planning the wedding ourselves. We do not require your assistance. Please respect our boundaries moving forward. Simple. Cold. Final. Within minutes, my phone blew up. First was the call from Debbie herself, alternating between sobbing and shrieking. Then came Rick, trying his old tactic of quiet threats. "You're making a mistake. You'll regret this. We're the only family you have." Then came the flying monkeys. Cousin Janice, who hadn't spoken to me in 3 years, suddenly messaging me about how family is everything. Aunt Marlene, forwarding long biblical passages about obeying one's parents. Even my high school principal, Mr. Grayson, wrote a bizarre, guilt-tripping email about honoring those who raised you. Debbie had unleashed a full-blown social war. Meanwhile, Alex's mother, Linda, a frail woman with arthritis and a heart big enough to swallow the world, showed up one day carrying bags of second-hand wedding decorations she'd found at a flea market. "They're a little dusty, but we can clean them up," she said with a hopeful smile. I cried harder than I ever had at any of Debbie's punishments. But this time, they were happy tears. Not everything was smooth sailing, though. Debbie retaliated in ways I hadn't expected. She canceled my childhood health insurance policy without warning. She called the university bursar's office and tried to revoke my upcoming semester's tuition payment, the one I had already planned to cover myself. She even tried to report my bank transfer as suspicious activity, hoping to freeze the funds temporarily. Every time, thanks to Darren's systems and a few panicked calls to Hawthorne Bank's manager, I managed to stay one step ahead. At one point, she tried to bribe Alex directly. She sent a courier to his worksite with a thick envelope, $10,000 in cash, and a simple handwritten note. "Leave her." Alex burned the note in Marcus's kitchen sink and texted me a photo of the ashes. By the end of that month, I barely recognized my life. It was terrifying. It was glorious. I thought that cutting the financial ties would be the worst of it. I was wrong. After Alex and I announced we had chosen a small, rustic vineyard for our wedding, a gorgeous place called Willow Creek Estate, with sloping hills and a weathered barn dripping with fairy lights, the real war began. The venue cost a fortune, over $20,000 just for the space alone, but Alex and I agreed it was worth it. It felt like ours, not something my parents had shoved into our hands. We signed the preliminary paperwork, paid the deposit, and for the first time in months, I let myself breathe. That lasted about 2 days. The first sign something was wrong came when I received a cryptic Facebook message from my cousin Erica, a girl I hadn't spoken to since she tried to sell me diet pills in high school. "You should really think twice about this wedding," she wrote. "Not everyone wants what's best for you." I ignored it at first. Erica was always stirring drama. But then more messages started coming. From relatives I barely knew. From people I hadn't seen since I was in braces. Some were concerned. Some were vicious. Some were so carefully worded they felt like little knives wrapped in silk. "Is Alex really who you think he is? Do you want to be saddled with someone who just wants your family's money? Are you sure this is the right path? It didn't stop at messages. Aunt Linda, Rick's nosy older sister who wore orthopedic shoes and smelled like mothballs, showed up at my work unannounced. She cornered me in the parking lot, waving her arms like a deranged traffic cop, demanding I think about the family reputation. You're embarrassing all of us, she screeched, loud enough for half the office to hear. You're behaving like a common runaway. I peeled away from the lot before she could block my car. Alex wasn't spared either. His boss, Mr. Franklin, pulled him aside one afternoon and told him he had received anonymous complaints about Alex's criminal background. Total lies, of course. Alex had never been arrested for anything worse than a speeding ticket. But when Franklin pressed for details, Alex realized the caller had mentioned things only someone from my family could know. The make of his truck, the name of the bar where he used to work, even his old apartment number. The worst blow came when Willow Creek Estate called me. Hi, Cindy, the event coordinator, Madison said, her voice strained and professional. We received some troubling information from a concerned party. Apparently, someone had called them claiming to be my legal guardian, which was laughable since I was 24 years old, and said I was mentally unstable and financially irresponsible. They warned that I was using illicit funds to pay for the wedding and that the vineyard would be complicit in fraud if they allowed the event to proceed. Madison hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. We just wanted to confirm everything's okay on your end. I nearly broke the phone, gripping it so hard my knuckles turned white. Everything is fine, I said through gritted teeth. There's no fraud. There's no issue. If they call again, tell them to shove it. Madison laughed awkwardly but promised to flag any suspicious calls. Still, I could tell the damage was done. Their trust was shaken. Meanwhile, Debbie and Rick launched their social media campaign. At first, it was subtle, vague posts about losing a daughter to bad influences, sprinkled with sad emojis and old childhood photos of me smiling in stiff dresses. People poured into the comments offering sympathy, not knowing the real story. Then it escalated. Debbie created an entire Facebook group called Save Cindy, inviting dozens of extended family members, old church friends, even old neighbors. Inside, they spun an entire narrative. That Alex was abusive. That I was being manipulated. That I was throwing away the beautiful life my parents built for me. Photos of Alex were shared without permission. Candid shots from his old social media pages, twisted with nasty captions. Is this the man you trust your daughter with? Screenshots of Alex's juvenile speeding tickets were posted like trophies. Old school reports of mine, comments like, needs to focus more, highlighted and mocked. Even private conversations I'd had years ago, chats with high school friends where I vented about my parents, somehow surfaced, twisted to make it look like I was unstable. Someone even photoshopped a fake eviction notice and claimed it was from Alex's previous apartment. It was psychotic. And it was working. Within days, my inbox was flooded again. Not just family, but old friends, acquaintances, random people who didn't know me at all, weighing in. Are you okay? Maybe you should listen to your parents. Family knows best. I felt like I was drowning. Alex tried to help. He deleted his social media accounts, changed his phone number, even offered to move to a different town to escape it all. But the damage was viral now. One night, we went to dinner with Marcus and his girlfriend Josie, a tough-as-nails bartender who had grown up bouncing between foster homes, and halfway through the meal, a woman I didn't recognize approached our table. You're Cindy, right? I nodded warily. I just want you to know, she said loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear, your parents are trying to save you. Don't make a mistake you'll regret. Marcus stood up so fast his chair clattered backward, but the woman was already scurrying away, self-righteous satisfaction dripping off her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But instead, I just sat there frozen while my steak went cold. After weeks of attacks, harassment, and thinly veiled threats, I realized there was no other choice. I had to cut them off completely. It started with the simple things, blocking Debbie and Rick's numbers on my phone, blocking their emails, blocking them on every social media account, blocking their flying monkeys too, Erica, Aunt Linda, even random acquaintances who had decided they knew my life better than I did. At first, it felt like pulling teeth. Every block was painful, a little admission that I was losing pieces of the world I had once thought was mine. But the more I blocked, the lighter I felt, until finally one evening, I sat on Marcus's battered couch with Alex beside me and realized there was no more buzzing, no more constant pings of guilt, no more poison tentacles trying to pull me back. Of course, they didn't stop. They just got more creative. I started receiving handwritten letters, creepy, old-fashioned, and deeply unsettling. Some were tearful. We miss you. Come home. Some were furious. You are killing this family. Some were manipulative masterpieces. Do you really want your grandparents to die thinking you hated them? They signed them with love. As if that made it better. I threw every letter into the dumpster without opening them. I was done. Meanwhile, the wedding loomed closer. We had reaffirmed our deposit with Willow Creek Estate after the sabotage attempts, but I wasn't taking any more chances. I called Madison, the event coordinator, and explained the situation in full. She was horrified and incredibly supportive. Within 2 days, she helped us draw up a new ironclad contract. Not only was the venue secured for our date, but Willow Creek agreed to hire private security for the event. 2 guards at the entrance, checking IDs against the guest list. Another patrolling the grounds quietly, blending in with the crowd. No ticket, no entry. Period. The head of security was a man named Victor Hayes, a former Marine with a face carved out of stone and arms the size of tree trunks. He didn't smile much, but when he did, it was the kind of smile that promised he would break anyone who tried anything. "I've handled worse," he said when I nervously explained the situation. I believed him. It felt good, better than good, to have people finally backing me up instead of undermining me at every turn. But the hardest part was still ahead. The guest list. When we first started planning, out of habit, I had included my parents. It was a miserable little reflex, some part of me still clinging to the fairy tale idea that they might come around. Now I knew better. With Alex beside me and Madison on a Zoom call, I went through the list and struck their names out. Debbie Johnson. Rick Johnson. Gone. Not just off the guest list, but banned. If they showed up, Victor and his team had full authority to remove them. When I signed the final version of the list, I felt a strange sort of grief. Not for them, but for the girl I used to be, the one who thought obedience was love. Of course, the news leaked almost immediately. Some slimy cousin, probably Erica, must have been spying on my social media or hacking into mutual contacts, because less than 24 hours after I finalized the guest list, Debbie posted a long, venomous Facebook rant. "After everything we've sacrificed, our own daughter has decided to disown her family over a boy. We will not be attending the wedding. We will pray for her soul." It was tagged. It was public. And it set off a wildfire. Old church ladies flooded the comments with praying hands and weeping emojis. Family friends I'd never even met chimed in, offering unsolicited lectures. Some people even sent private messages suggesting I was under the influence of drugs or had been brainwashed. But there were surprises too. Several distant cousins, people who had quietly drifted away from the family years ago, reached out privately, thanking me for standing up. "I wish I had your courage," one wrote. Another said, "They tried to control me too. You're not crazy." It didn't erase the pain, but it dulled it a little. Meanwhile, Debbie escalated. She tried to call Alex's employer again, claiming he had a drinking problem. She mailed a fake legal document to my apartment claiming she was petitioning for guardianship because I was mentally incompetent. She even showed up at Willow Creek one afternoon, pretending to be a concerned client, asking probing questions about the wedding. Thankfully, Victor was already on site that day, setting up initial security layouts. He intercepted her before she could get past the parking lot. According to Madison, Victor stood silently as Debbie shrieked about losing her daughter, then quietly took out his phone and started filming. Debbie lost it, screaming, sobbing, threatening to call the police, until finally she realized she wasn't getting anywhere and stormed off. Victor emailed me the video later that night, just in case we needed evidence. Watching her meltdown on my screen, I felt nothing. No sadness. No guilt. Just relief. The morning of my wedding, I woke up before the alarm, heart pounding. For a split second, the old fear was there, the dread that something would go wrong, that Debbie would somehow force her way in, ruin everything. That she'd find a way to snatch the day from my hands like she had stolen so many others. But when I looked out the window of the little rented bridal suite and saw the rolling hills of Willow Creek glowing under the soft morning sun, the fear faded. She couldn't touch me here. Victor and his team were already on site, dressed sharply in black suits, discreet earpieces tucked in, their expressions professional and unreadable. Marcus joked that we looked like we were hosting a diplomatic summit instead of a wedding, but I didn't care. Security was necessary. Peace was priceless. The morning flew by in a blur of makeup brushes, hairspray, champagne toasts. My dress, a simple, stunning A-line gown I had picked out myself without anyone else's approval, hung perfectly against my body. No lace frills. No itchy bows. Just me. Josie, now officially one of my bridesmaids, grinned at me from the mirror. "You're glowing, girl." Like, radioactive glowing. I laughed, nerves crackling under my skin. Alex's best friend, Darren, the paranoid software engineer turned best man, checked the perimeter twice, just to be sure. He wore a tux awkwardly, like a cat forced into clothes, but the fierce loyalty in his eyes made me want to cry. Linda, Alex's mother, was already fussing with flower arrangements when I walked downstairs. Her hands shook slightly from her arthritis, but she smiled so wide when she saw me that it erased years of sadness from her face. "You look like a dream," she whispered, pulling me into a hug that smelled like lavender and warm linen. The ceremony itself was a blur. I barely remember walking down the aisle. I barely remember the vows. All I remember is Alex's face steady certain, and the way he said, "I do," like it was the easiest decision he'd ever made. There was a beat of silence when the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, and then a roar of applause so loud it shook the rafters. We kissed. We laughed. We cried. We lived. And no, my parents weren't there. There were no dramatic last-minute showdowns. No objections shouted from the back row. Victor's team had quietly, professionally turned away 3 concerned guests trying to crash, Erica among them, red-faced and screeching about saving Cindy, but they never got close enough for me to even notice. It was perfect. During the reception, Linda and Alex's father, Earl, a hulking man with a soft spot for bad jokes and bourbon, took to the dance floor during the father-daughter dance lot. Linda clutched Earl's hand, and they twirled awkwardly but joyfully to the slow, crooning song Alex had picked out. People cheered. Some wiped tears. I stood off to the side with Alex's arm wrapped tight around my waist, heart aching and full at the same time. It wasn't the dance I had imagined as a little girl, but it was better. It was real. Later that night, as the party wound down and the fairy lights cast everything in a golden glow, I sat on the hood of Marcus's truck with Josie, sipping the last of the champagne straight from the bottle. "You did it," she said, bumping my shoulder. "Yeah," I said. "I did." But, of course, it wasn't completely over. A week later, after the honeymoon, a short, perfect trip to a quiet beach town where nobody knew our names, the reconciliation attempts began. They started small. A postcard from Debbie. No return address. Just a photo of the house I grew up in and the words, "It's not too late." I shredded it without a second thought. Then came an email from Rick. Stiff. Formal. "We would like to sit down and discuss a path forward." No apology. No acknowledgement of what they had done. Just an invitation to pretend none of it had happened. Blocked. Then came the package. A large box, dropped at my doorstep by a courier with no return label. Inside, my baby blanket, stiff and yellowed with age. A photo album, pages meticulously arranged with childhood memories. A single chilling note. "You will regret cutting us out." Alex found me standing in the doorway, staring at the box like it might explode. He didn't say anything. He just took it out of my hands and dropped it in the trash without hesitation. "We're building new memories," he said quietly. "With people who deserve them." Still, the attacks didn't stop. Cousin Erica, desperate for relevance, started spreading rumors that I was pregnant and that the wedding had been a shotgun affair. Aunt Marlene posted cryptic Bible verses online about wayward daughters leading good men to ruin. Even Mr. Grayson, my old high school principal, who should have known better, sent an email hinting that maybe it wasn't too late to reconcile. All of them ignored the obvious. There was no apology. No accountability. Just manipulation, repackaged and rebranded. I deleted every message. Every call went unanswered. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I just didn't care anymore. They had made their choice. And now, finally, I was making mine. A year after my wedding, the dust still hadn't fully settled. The scandal my parents had brewed before and during the wedding, the rumors, the sabotage attempts, the Facebook group drama, had exploded far beyond what they anticipated. They hadn't just embarrassed themselves privately. They had humiliated themselves publicly. It turned out, when you unleash a smear campaign and try to crash your daughter's wedding, people talk. And they remember. The fallout was brutal. It started with the inner circle, the relatives who had once blindly supported Debbie and Rick without question. Aunt Marlene, for instance, suddenly wasn't returning Debbie's calls. Uncle Phil, Rick's younger brother, who had always been the family's gruff, chain-smoking truth-teller, pulled him aside at a 4th of July cookout and told him, loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear, "You screwed up, Ricky." Big time. Even some of their old church friends started quietly unfriending them on Facebook. Nobody wanted to be associated with a couple who stalked their adult daughter's wedding like bitter exes. Erica, ever the opportunist, switched sides immediately. Within months, she was posting Instagram photos hanging out with me and Josie, captioned with things like, "Family is what you make it," and "Love over blood." She even started cozying up to Alex, trying to play the cool cousin card. We let her hang around, but nobody trusted her more than they could throw her. But the real reckoning came at the annual Johnson family reunion. It was held every September at my grandparents' sprawling property just outside of town, a tradition so entrenched it might as well have been a national holiday for our family. When the invitation came in the mail, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to burn it. But a bigger part, the newer, stronger part, wanted to go. Not for them. For me. So Alex and I RSVP'd yes. We rolled up to the reunion in his newly restored 1968 Mustang, freshly waxed and gleaming in the afternoon sun. Heads turned. Whispers started immediately. I spotted Debbie and Rick under one of the canopies, surrounded by the few remaining loyalists. They both looked older, smaller somehow, like balloons that had lost their air. Debbie wore a stiff, too bright sundress and a brittle smile. Rick stood beside her, expressionless, his once imposing posture wilted. I didn't wave. I didn't even glance in their direction. Instead, I beelined straight for my grandfather, Grandpa Sam, a wiry old man with a booming laugh and a permanent smell of pipe tobacco, and gave him a hug that lifted him off the ground. "There's my girl," he crowed, ignoring Debbie's death glare from across the lawn. Throughout the afternoon, the divide was obvious. One side of the lawn, Debbie and her dwindling circle, shooting dagger-like glances at anyone who dared talk to me. The other side, everyone else. Laughing, eating, catching up with Alex and me like nothing had happened. It turned out, people had grown tired of the drama. Tired of Debbie's endless victim act. Tired of Rick's brooding silence. At one point, I caught Aunt Carla, my mother's cousin, cornering Debbie near the dessert table. "I don't know what you thought would happen," Carla said, loud enough for me to hear as I pretended to check out the pie selection. "You treat your daughter like property, and you're shocked when she leaves? Grow up, Debbie." Debbie's face flushed crimson. Rick stared down at his shoes. I turned away, hiding my smile. Later, as the sun dipped low and the kids started running around with sparklers, Debbie made her move. She approached quietly, weaving through the crowd with a plate of cookies like some demented Girl Scout. Alex spotted her first and moved to intercept, but I shook my head. I could handle this. She stopped a few feet from me, the plate trembling slightly in her hands. "Cindy," she said, voice thin and tight, "I made your favorite. Chocolate chip. Just like when you were little." I looked at the cookies, then back at her. There was no apology in her eyes. No real remorse. Just desperation wrapped in nostalgia. I'm not hungry, I said calmly. Her smile faltered. Maybe we can talk? Just you and me. No, thanks, I said turning away. I felt her hand brush my arm. A final frantic attempt to tether me back. I didn't flinch. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply walked away, straight into Alex's arms. Behind me, I heard Debbie's voice crack, heard the muffled sobs she buried against Rick's chest. But I didn't turn back. Not this time. Not ever again.